always asked by people, how do you do Course in Miracles psychotherapy? The way you do Course in Miracles psychotherapy is you practice and learn the course for yourself. You can't teach it. If you think you could teach it, you're making the same mistake everybody else makes. Right? When Jesus says in the pamphlet, which again we'll look at later, that basically healing occurs when the therapist gives up judgment, that's the training. When he says the world's training of therapists is a curriculum of judgment, then it's the unlearning of judgment. That's the training. It has nothing to do with technique. It has nothing to do with mastery of the principles of the course. It has nothing to do with learning what the appropriate interaction is or intervention is with a person. It's learning how to let go of judgment, which are your blocks. And you want to learn not only to touch someone else's block with those gentle hands, but you want to learn to touch your own block with those gentle hands. And again, this cannot happen if you lose, until you lose sight of the specific and embrace the whole. Very, very often the most loving thing you could do for someone is to allow them to make mistakes. Is to allow them to make a shambles of their life. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if you're hung up on the form that there's a right way to live, a right way to do something, then you're teaching that the ego is right. You're teaching that the block is real. Again, sometimes the most loving and helpful thing you can do for someone is to let them make a mistake. Just as Jesus let Helen make her mistakes. He did not quote the Course and hit her over the head with it. Because what is the mistake becomes the way home. That's the detour. Remember that line, what the ego made to harm, the Holy Spirit uses to heal. The curriculum that Jesus uses to teach us is our life, our special relationships. That's the curriculum. That's the classroom. He can't teach us without it. So he uses our blocks, he uses the detours as a way of letting us get back home. And we're all, once again, terrified of going directly back. That's why he has those comforting passages such as, do not be afraid, you'll be lifted up and abruptly hurled into reality. I'm not taking you on an express train right home because your fear is so great. Right? And then he says, in talking about dreams, he says, you do not awaken from nightmares. You need gentle dreams. These are the happy dreams. You need gentle dreams that slowly awaken you from the nightmare of specialness and the nightmare of hate and the nightmare of judgment and guilt. Right? When Jesus talks about in the workbook of God taking the final step, he says, don't deny the little steps he asks you to take to him. The little steps are the detours, our neuroses, our problems, our conflicts, whether they're psychological or physical. You don't judge them. You don't take them away from people. You join them there. I remember once when I was a graduate student, we were listening to some tapes of some famous therapists, and one was made with a schizophrenic person. And there was part of the time you could not tell who the patient was. The therapist had so blended in with the patient that you could not tell until much later on in the session. That the therapist had really, it was like a duet. Right? And the patient reached a place of peace. What happened afterwards, I don't know. But in that hour, there was a place of peace. And it came because the therapist joined with the patient. And it was like listening to a musical duet. Right? The voices blended. That's what Jesus meant in that passage that we quote very often here in chapter 2 in the text when he told Helen, don't ask me to take your fear away from you. Don't ask me to take your block away from you. If I did that, I'd be tampering with the law of cause and effect, the most basic law that there is. I'd be depreciating the power of your mind. Because, to borrow something he says later on, what your ego made to hurt and harm, I will use to heal. The block that you introduced to protect yourself, quote unquote, from the love of God, I will now use as a detour so that your fear will not be exacerbated. You will not be thrown into a terror. But I will walk with you through the detour. helping you realize that this detour is now part of your right-minded Melos. Right? There is the true Melos, there's that true melody, that true song. Then the ego speaks first and is wrong, and then we have the ego's Melos, which is to avoid God and make up a world in which to hide and then blame everybody else for it, all our thoughts of specialness and hate and judgment. And the right-minded Melos, which is where Jesus or the Holy Spirit come in, is not to change the wrong-minded one. To touch it with the gentle hands of forgiveness means you don't attack it. It means you help the person recognize they don't have to be afraid. And you walk that journey with them, even if it's a roundabout detour, which of course it is, because everything here is. You don't get concerned with the form. Again, you don't attack the form, you don't criticize the form, you don't embrace the form, you don't love the form, you don't hate the form, you don't try to change the form. That's why Jesus says, seek not to change the world, choose to change your mind about the world. See the block as the only way the person could learn that he or she has been mistaken. If you attack it, if you insist that somebody be different, think differently, behave differently, dress differently, walk differently, eat differently, study A Course in Miracles differently, you are making the error real. And you're telling them that this block is real. And no matter how gentle the hands of forgiveness are, they won't work. It won't help. Because you've already judged the problem as real. You see people's problems as they're saying to you, this is the only way I could learn that I was wrong. I can't be confronted with the truth head on because I'm too terrified of that. Again, that's why we all ran away from home. We're too terrified of that. And so their block, their neurosis, their hang-up, their maladaptive behavior, their screwed up life is a way of saying to you, this is the only way I could learn. Please show me this way. That's what vision does. That's why Jesus uses the word gentle so often in the Course. But you can't do that if you have myopic vision. You can't do that if you think you understand what the nature of the block is. You know, there are several passages in the Course. You know, there's one notable one in the manual where Jesus basically makes fun of us for thinking that we could possibly understand anything, that we could judge anything. He said, in order for you to do that, he says, in effect, you'd have to understand the whole. You'd have to understand the entire atonement path and how this little thing, this little piece that you're so concerned about and judging fits in with the whole path. And he says there's no one who has that kind of information except the Holy Spirit. So the holistic approach, whether you're talking about conducting a symphony, or you're talking about a psychotherapy session, or you're talking about being a student of the Course, what that is that you see everything as part of a whole, and you do not have to understand how it fits in. Only that is part of a whole. Your job is not to understand. Your job is only to be gentle and kind. You're telling the person this has no effect on love. The inner melody continues. Right? Nothing has come between you and that melody. Not one note in heaven's song was missed. Right? No matter how many conductors have mangled the Beethoven symphony, the symphony is still there. Just waits for the gentle hands holding the baton to touch it, and then it comes back to life. No matter how many people have mangled the Course in Miracles, doesn't change what the Course is. And if you get upset by other people's mangling, I'm not sure that's the word, if you get upset, then obviously there's something you believe, all right, is in you that's a mangler. I'm sure that's not a word either. Otherwise, it wouldn't bother you. But you want to strive to grow into where this Course is. And becoming a slave to the word is the same mistake as conductors becoming a slave to the notes. Something is missing.